Welcome to another exciting episode of Redefining AI, the tech podcast, hosted by Squirro, the generative AI enterprise platform. And I'm your host, Lauren Hawker-Zaffer. Now, today we're delving into healthcare and the immense possibilities that lie ahead as we harness the power of AI and data to shape the future. Our guest in this particular episode is someone who's truly transforming the way healthcare organizations collaborate and advance science. We're thrilled to welcome Dr. Mitesh Rao, the founder and CEO of OMNY Health. Now, Dr. Rao has built a career around innovation, patient safety, and system redesign, all with a focus on improving healthcare through data-driven insights. Now, OMNY Health, his latest venture, is leading the charge as it's creating a platform that enables real-time data sharing across healthcare institutions, all while ensuring the highest standards of compliance and security. Now, beyond his groundbreaking work with OMNY Health, Dr. Rao is a board-certified emergency medicine physician, an assistant professor at Stanford, and an influential leader in patient safety, having held pivotal roles at Stanford Healthcare and Northwestern Memorial Hospital. With a career that spans clinical practice, academic leadership, and healthcare innovation, Dr. Rao's insight into the future of healthcare are as impactful as they are forward-thinking. Now, today, we've got an exciting discussion for you. We'll be discussing how democratizing healthcare through data can improve outcomes, the rise of venture capital funding in healthcare, and the potential of AI to bridge systematic gaps, and much more. So it's without further ado that I would welcome Dr. Rao to Redefining AI. Welcome.
Thank you, Lauren. It's wonderful to be here. And really, I've got to get you to do all my intros. That was fantastic.
Yeah, it always sounds much more impressive when someone else does it for you, I think. Yeah, it's really lovely to have you here. The first question that I want to ask you is, what do you like about your job? What brings you the most joy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that if you asked me 10 years ago whether I'd ever start a company, I would have laughed at you and said, no. I quite like my job. I quite like what I do on the health system side, on the academic side, and I'm very comfortable in my world. But I will tell you, it's a special kind of joy to be building in this space and to be at that edge of where healthcare is advancing. And so what I love is just the sheer impact of everything that we do. And it's never easy, but step by step, OMNY is focused on a mission that we have been dedicated to since we first conceived of the idea of the company, which is creating a common language of data in healthcare on a national level. And that piece, right, building that foundational data layer that has never really existed for our country, has been something that we've dedicated ourselves to for more than 6 years now. And it's been, I would say the best part about this job is seeing the progress. Because I remember when we were just an idea on a PowerPoint slide deck, and now to see that we've built a national data network that encompasses the healthcare data for 20% of the country, and by end of year, it'll be a third, is truly remarkable for us and makes me proud.
Yeah, that is remarkable. So obviously, like building a common language of a data layer on a national level is quite a big challenge that you're taking on.
It is, and it's it's fascinating to think about the space, because one of the biggest challenges we face in healthcare, and this fundamentally goes deep into why what we need to have AI be successful in healthcare. The first fundamental challenge we have is data, and that challenge exists on two levels. First, we have archaic infrastructure and underlying subsystems that are specifically designed to silo data, to separate data out, to make it very challenging to create that unified data. And that challenge, right, when we talk about things like access to data, it forms sort of that first barrier. The second barrier is then, even when you get access to the data itself is messy, it's incomplete. There's incredible variability, how even within a health system, how one hospital codes data versus the other hospital, or how one floor or section of the hospital codes data can be completely different. Nomenclatures can be different. Data models are different. Even within the same EMR, the different instances are very different. So trying to get usable data is sort of the second barrier. So first, we have to try to get access to it. And then once you get access to it, you have to try to get that data to be actually functional. I always use the analogy that if OMNY's job was to bake cookies, what comes out of the underlying infrastructure systems, it's not flour or sugar. It's unchapped wheat, and it takes a lot to actually transform it into something usable. So, yeah, those are some of the biggest challenges that I think we are targeted on delivering. And today, we've been lucky enough to have built this for so much of the country already now, where we have unified, clean, structured, common data model, aligned data that can really start to power the next generation of healthcare.
Without going too much into the nuances, because there's a couple of questions that I want to ask before we go into the nuances, but there's one question that seems is quite pertinent when you speak of that, and it's also maintenance. So first, obviously, there's getting access to the data. There's looking at the archaic infrastructures. There's probably looking at lack of data accessibility. And there's probably the fact that maybe, I don't know, 75% of working practices or data entries are not actually in systems that are accessible. There's also the post component of like data maintenance. Like, how much effort do you put into like data culture, encouraging clean data practices, and how possible is that?
No, it's a great question. And it's something that you can't just do once. It's a living effort, right? So we always think about data as both, you have your historical components, but then in healthcare, it's very unique compared to a lot of industries because you have basically clinical drift, right? So new care practices come in, new medicines come to market, new drugs, new treatments. It's constantly evolving at a very quick pace as we rapidly advance healthcare. And so data itself needs to always be incredibly timely, incredibly comprehensive. And that's a really important piece. So when we think about bringing data in, it's not just making sure that you have access to all that historical data, but it's how do you create these dynamic systems where you get ready access to the latest data, the latest information. And that's an important piece that we talk about the broader world of healthcare. That's one of the specific deeper nuances in healthcare AI is that you don't just worry about concept drift, you worry about this clinical drift. You need to have access to the latest information or your models will not accurately answer questions and they'll quickly become stale. And that's a really interesting differentiator compared to other industries where you don't see such quick shifts in the knowledge base, if you will.
Exactly. I mean, I can 100% relate to that. So if we look at, obviously there was an inspiration that started this whole journey into OMNY Health. Like, what was that inspiration? Why did you say, okay, right, well, I'm going to found this company? And how does it differentiate from, I mean, you've got competitors, everyone has competitors. How does it differentiate?
Great questions. We built OMNY out of, frankly, my frustration, where I was sitting on the executive side and major health systems, and I kept having pharma, med device companies, early AI companies, analytics companies coming, wanting to partner on data. And so that was sort of one world that was, and the external world coming in saying, hey, you're sitting on incredible knowledge. It's deep, it's comprehensive. We've been trying to make do with things like claims or registry data, but those don't really paint the full picture. If we want what we're doing to be representative, to really be able to factor in the nuances of every population, the variability when it comes to things like social determinants of health or health equity, we really need access to this deep, timely data. And that challenge was tough. The second side of the equation was even internally at our organizations, getting access to deep, usable data that was secure and compliant was very challenging. I was lucky if I could get analytics teams to put up a dashboard for me once a quarter. It was just incredibly challenging to get my hands around even our own data in-house. And so I looked at that and I said, well, if we're going to have a future in healthcare where data is driving everything, then as providers, patients, we need to have a seat at the table. We really need to build the rails, the data front door, the infrastructure, the pipes, right, to enable this. And there had been a lot of conversations about companies wanting to do this. And as a health system executive, I went around and talked to all of these companies, and I couldn't find anyone who shared the vision that I had of open architecture, of truly a utility layer that would serve as infrastructure for organizations to partner going forward. Most organizations were thinking about data from the standpoint of locking it down or putting it in a glass box or building a SaaS stack and putting analytics on top of it, and data for the sake of building yet more products without empowering all of the stakeholders, to me seemed like a missed opportunity. And so the vision that we set out with for OMNY was, how do we build that infrastructure and do it in a scalable so that all of these stakeholders, whether it's providers, patients, life sciences companies, med device companies, researchers, analytics and AI companies, can have a foundation right? So you think about that stack as you go upward, right? Infrastructure, enabling, delivery, those are all important pieces, but at the very base of that foundation is the data layer. And creating that data layer that encompasses everything from structured data to unstructured data to lab data to imaging data to eventually genomic data, right? You want to be able to put all that together in one strong foundation, because if that foundation is whole, if it's complete, if it represents the country, then you can start to build on top of it. And when we set out, Lauren, AI was still in its very early iterations. I mean, we've been doing AI in healthcare for a long time, but it wasn't anywhere near this current boom that has come forward with generative AI. But still, it was a very important piece. And so that idea that you could have data that could form the fuel, right? Because otherwise, in healthcare, when we innovate, you're building something incredible. You're building that Ferrari, you're building that powerful new Tesla, and it's sitting in the garage without energy or fuel behind it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, definitely.
everything we build is only as good as the foundational pieces that are going to drive it and support it.
So let's look a little bit more at your tech stack then, because we do as a show, a tech show, we have a lot of people that are interested in the technical infrastructure. So if you look at your tech stack, maybe like talking about the specific data layer, but not only the data layer, let's look at it in real life application, like what technologies are being used, how are you using them, and what's the business value?
Yeah, great question. So there's a few different pieces to think about. So the way Omni works as a broader ecosystem is we partner directly with provider organizations all over the country, large IDNs, nonprofits, community health systems, academic medical centers, community-based specialty groups. So the first piece of this vision is you want to touch every aspect of clinical care, and you want to touch every geography, every state, every region, every ethnicity, every population, right? Because at its core, the data has to be representative. If you don't do that, you are already not doing justice to what we're trying to build, because you're going to not be inclusive of everyone in the country, right? And so that's at a foundational piece, the first part of where Omni focuses. And we have been proud and lucky enough to build incredible partnerships all over the country that have started to form that foundational data layer. The second piece, when you go from there now, is like call it the end users, right? And so when you think about who leverages the data today across Omni's network, everything from trials to rare disease research to clinical care pathway development to quality improvement initiatives to medication and device safety. These are all of the initiatives now that are being fueled and run on Omni data. And that's call it our core mission in business, is providing the data layer that can drive the next generation of healthcare's research and development. Where we've started to grow now is, not surprisingly, if you look at the last 18 to 24 months of, let's say, venture capital funding, a ton of AI companies have come forward in healthcare, building what has the promise to really transform our space. Everything from documentation to prior authorization to clinical decision making to predicting adverse events to trial support, right? Every aspect of healthcare has incredible potential to be transformed by the AI space. The challenge that we're seeing now is that as these companies come forward and are ready to start building, they need the fuel, they need the building blocks. And our industry is very different than other industries where, you'll read about OpenAI partnering with Condé Nast to get access to Reddit's data, right, as a foundational piece to train on, to partner with all of these sort of larger entities that have publicly available data at scale, right? And that's fantastic if you're training models to serve regular pieces. But if you ask those models why a patient with a rare disease is likely to fail a biologic treatment in the first 30 days, or what adverse events that patient's phenotypic data is likely to lead to, it can't answer that question because it's not trained on deep proprietary data that forms the backbone of clinical knowledge, right? And so that's an incredible handicap in the AI healthcare space that everyone's trying to solve. And what you see now is companies running around trying to figure out, can they use synthetic data? Can they convince other section companies to release certain pieces of data? People are trying to piecemeal assemble the foundational building blocks to support their AI vision. And that's really where, and I'll be honest, Lauren, we never set out to do this, but by virtue of what we built as a data layer, that's where Omni's starting to really shine now, because we have AI companies coming in and fully running on our data layer. providing solutions to pharma with everything from pharmacovigilance to clinical trial prediction, all running on this data. And that's an important piece for us, I think, as we see the future of where healthcare goes, particularly AI, is you need that data in order to actually functionally make it work and really be able to deliver on the promise.
And I think that's exactly the segue into the question that I wanted to ask there. So obviously it is all about data. And one thing that I find fascinating, so I come from Britain, I come from Scotland, as you can tell, but I live in Zurich. I've lived in Zurich for many, many years. So I grew up in a public healthcare system. So in Scotland, we have access to healthcare. In Switzerland, it's a private healthcare system, very similar to the US. And sometimes there's a lot of criticism in terms of representation of what can be accessed and data models that are available. And obviously you're talking about like training models on data that is accessible and also making sure that it's representative. I mean, you spoke about, it being representative of like clinical care, the clinical knowledge model, etc. Is that actually possible in a nation that has a private healthcare system when there's such diversity and possible exclusion of data that should be represented?
That's a great question. And if you remember back a few months ago, the generative AI image generation came under fire for creating images that weren't really represented, right? And that made it into the public conversation, and people were understandably upset. But at the end of the day, you look at a situation like that and you can say, okay, people were upset, but nobody necessarily got harmed. People's feelings got harmed and people felt excluded, but nobody suffered let's say, an adverse event because of that. This is where healthcare AI gets more challenging, because if you don't have data that is representative, you have to trust that these outputs from these large language models are going to be inclusive, because if they're not inclusive, then there's a chance that they won't actually factor in the specifics for the population, right? And so if you think about something like a large language model predicting adverse events or safety issues or signal detection, if that data doesn't represent everyone, it's not going to make the medications or the treatment safe for everyone. And so that's a real challenge, right? And that's something that as an industry, we have to really be cognizant of. Now, to go back to your question about can data truly be representative? Yes, in healthcare it can be, but especially in the United States, but you're right, we have an incredibly diverse population. We have incredible variability, state by state, not even state by state, but within the same states, right? And so how do you capture that piece? The way you do that is by creating a democratized data layer, one that can be a foundational piece that can partner with every walk of the clinical practice, every walk of life. Because if you build a data layer that's only focused on, let's say, academic health systems, or only focused on large nonprofit health systems, or only focused on community-based practices, you're only going to get certain aspects of care. And so when we set out to build OMNY, the vision, which, it was its own challenge, but one that we were dedicated to solving, was can we create something that was agnostic of the underlying data layer, that could be a partnership vehicle for everyone, where we can actually align data from the community-based practice on a cloud-based EMR, the large academic medical center on a major, functional EMR with an on-prem system, to a community-based practice that has multiple EMRs and is still dealing through their own tech stack transformation. Can we create something that is agnostic? And then can we also account for the variability in healthcare, where the health systems, the provider organizations may switch up their tech stack, they may evolve it, they may change between vendors, right? How do you do something where it's not tied, where it's actually flexible infrastructure? And that was our focus. And it made it a bit of a harder journey, in all honesty, but one that we felt was the right journey, one that we felt was the right approach to create lasting, scalable capabilities. And today, our data, covers every patients across every state, every geography, every region, every ethnicity, right? It's truly representative data. It's not focal, it's not limited, it's not only a subset of the country. And it does that also for clinical care patterns and care delivery, where it represents everything from outpatient ambulatory community care to inpatient academic care. Every piece of that part is captured. And that's why we feel comfortable and confident that we can say our data truly represents the nation and solves a lot of these issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it's disrupting all avenues. So you spoke as well about VC funded in healthcare. So it has been on the rise, and there's an evident indication that there is interest. How do you see this impacting innovation
Yeah, it's interesting. Like as the market, interest rates get cut, VCs are looking to deploy more dollars now. There's definitely a lot of focus on the AI space, and I think
Mm,
that's incredible, right? And that's powerful for the future of healthcare. I think now we're starting to see a realization that it's not just about the SaaS companies building in this space, but it's also about the infrastructure plays.
yeah.
Everything from accessing data to data security, compliance, tagging, labeling, right? These are all the component pieces. Companies that are focused on the building blocks, call them the picks and shovels, call them the rails, whatever you want to label you want to use for that infrastructure piece. But the truth is that those foundational components are what are going to enable success. And so we are seeing the broader investment community start to really focus on that and understand that the stack to support AI is just as important as the AI itself. And that's an interesting piece. And the other purview that's fascinating for companies that are building those stacks is that they have the ability to go up the stack too. They have the ability to do really interesting pieces and support component parts. And that's an interesting capability as I think the investment community is looking at this space. The final part that I'll say is that for companies that are focused on this infrastructure component, the need for security compliance is paramount in our industry.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's a real
100%.
concern that you're seeing start to creep up in the broader conversations, which, we'll talk about patient safety, right? So, and that takes two sides to the coin. And for me, safety and compliance is my bread and butter. I spent 20 years of my career before this focused on that. Um, it's not just how do you protect patient identities and security around things like PHI,
Mm.
but it's also about safety. When a model puts out an output, right? I always use the example that if I ask ChatGPT where to go to dinner tonight, and it gives me 5 restaurants, and the first restaurant is actually closed, and I drive to that restaurant, it's closed. I'm annoyed, but no one gets harmed. But if a GPT tells me, if a large language model tells me to put a patient on drug A instead of drug B, and drug A was the wrong choice, right? Like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
patient safety is a big piece of the conversation going forward.
No, it's, I think in any regulated industry, and I think that that's why there's such, that white glove sort of treatment as well with healthcare, because it is, it's one of the industries that we still very much, in my opinion, need a human in the loop. Yeah.
Human in the
So,
loop, yes. At least to just secure, validate, and confirm. And our outputs. The nice thing we have about healthcare is that as practitioners, as clinicians, my fellow physicians and I, we look at anything that gives us an answer, and we always question because we always want to know, where's the proof point on this? What's the literature? What's the reason? What's the alignment part? That's a consistent challenge. And so a black box large language model won't cut it in healthcare when it comes to something that's going to touch patients. The most important piece is having line of sight to the actual data that is being referenced. So you talk about rack approaches, right? Getting an output from a GPT is great, but an output that also then links to, and here are the 50 to 100 cases of care that this is based on, so you can then validate that. Call it regulatory grade, call it clinical grade, whatever you want to call it. That's an important piece. And that is something that Omni is really focused on delivering. So models that run on our data today can have that tick and tie back to the individual episodes of care, de-identified, secure, and compliant, but validating the output of the large language model, which without that, we have to question what
yeah,
is the large language model.
100%. So obviously you're in an interesting position. You've been on sort of both sides on the fence. So if you're looking at healthcare innovation in the future, like where would you like to see it go? Because there's, hypothesis around where it might go, but where would you like to see it go?
So there's kind of the immediate needs and then there's the future needs. In healthcare, we have a lot of inefficiencies that lead to cost, waste of dollars and waste of time, right? So things that improve our efficiency on that side are really important. And you're seeing a lot of the early plays in AI and analytics focus on things like prior auth, documentation, right? These are all really important pieces that we need to move faster on and more efficient on. You do that, you cut out a ton of time, a ton of waste, a ton of cost in the health system. The other component then, when you start going past that, is how do we really personalize care for patients?
Mm.
Because in many ways, take the inflammatory market. When we do things like biologics, sometimes we have to try a bunch of things to figure out what will actually work for a patient. And time is not just dollars, but time is frankly outcomes for patients, right? You want to get the patient on the right treatment as fast as you can, and you want to ensure you want to ensure that you're reducing the risk of adverse events or treatment failures. And so the next phase of AI is really going to be focused on clinical care. And that is incredibly exciting. Huge potential to be able to support physicians. As a physician, the idea that I can use technology and data to really enhance and augment how quickly I help patients is incredible.
Yeah.
But that's also really risky, like we talked about. And so huge potential in sort of the next phase, huge risk. And I think what I'm really excited to see is that the industry as a whole is staying focused on that North Star of patient safety, security, compliance. Yes, we want to move into the future where we can actually really transform how we personalize care for patients, but we have to do it in the right way, the secure way, the compliant way. We can't take risks because our industry has a zero tolerance for security and compliance issues and a zero tolerance for patient safety issues. And that's an important mandate across our field.
And yes, yeah, I mean, it's good to hear that it is. I mean, I think everyone will be relieved that it is as well, because it is important both from a regulatory and ethical perspective. I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Redefining AI. It's been a really wonderful experience to learn about, the future, the opportunities that are at our door, and also the intersection of AI and healthcare. So thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me. Really wonderful conversation.